Hi, everybody. My name is Mitch Leppicello, and I'm a clinical social worker, and I am honored to be a presenter for the ASPIKA talks for you today. I want to thank everybody, Rita, and everybody behind the scenes for putting this together. I hope to leave you with some good pieces about autism and neurodivergent resources and supports, and what led me to working with and helping and being a part of the neurodivergent world. Well, let's start from the beginning. I grew up in a place called Bloomington, Minnesota. And Bloomington is in the upper Midwest. And so we were a pretty homogeneous group up here in the Midwest during the 60s, 70s, and 80s growing up. And I spent a lot of my time outdoors. I was a very outdoors person. And living in the upper Midwest, you kind of have to be outside. So I had four siblings, and we lived in a neighborhood with a lot of people interested in also being outdoors. So a lot of outdoor experiences, which I carry with me today. Um, so growing up in the Midwest, going through school and um, high school and working, and part of the things that I picked up while I was doing my uh, playing my recreational activities, was also finding work. I was really interested in working. I liked money like most teenagers, and so I started picking up jobs in the hotel and restaurant industry. And I found that that was kind of my thing, like working with people in hotel restaurant management, kind of hotel hospitality. And I found that was a really interesting place. I could see myself doing that in my future. So I started investigating that a little bit. And I started working with and asking about hotel managers and how their lives went and how they did what they did. And not all the stories were pretty. They worked hard. They worked very hard. And so it was at that point that I was still very interested in hotel restaurant management. Growing up, but it was at that point that I started to think, hmm, okay, I'll keep also looking just to make sure that there are other things, that this isn't the only thing. So that was the first sort of crack, or the first opportunity to look at also something different. So as I left my high school, graduated high school, and stayed home for a year, trying to still figure stuff out, working. And then I found I really need to leave the area. I think that's what kind of came to my 1 year of going to school, going to college at home. I need to leave Minnesota. I need to see the rest of the world, the country. I have been overseas a few times, lucky enough, with my parents and my grandfather. And so I was able to sort of see different cultures and different goings on. And I think I still wanted more of that. So I left for found a family member, actually, an aunt of mine who lived in on the East Coast. And I started, asking her and talking with her about what the possibility of living with them and just sort of relocating individually, really trying to kind of see if I can find myself, I think, as I look back on that time. And so I really enjoyed living out there on the East Coast. I started college in New Haven, Connecticut, at Southern Connecticut State University in New Haven, and learned that it was very, very different from Bloomington, Minnesota. Not so homogeneous, very heterogeneous. And so that was my first big surprise, my first awakening to, this is the rest of the country. This is what I needed to see, what I needed to kind of to really notice differences. And so I started really kind of integrating differences. Wow, there and needs. Holy cow, right? So when you go to a new place and it's more hetero than the place you came from, it's a big experience. So I really enjoyed that. I still was thinking. Now I haven't left the hotel restaurant management thought yet, so I'm still thinking about that and looking at business classes. And as I'm working my way through college out in New Haven, looking at business classes and investigating, working with people still, and that sort of came in with one of the jobs I had working at Yale New Haven Hospital at the time. I found myself, oh, okay, well, this is interesting. I'm working with people, but in a different way. And there's healthcare now with hospitality, and there's medical services now with hospitality. So this is interesting. So still very kind of interested in working with people, and that continued to kind of evolve. during college, I had to take a psychology class, like many people do, just kind of a prerequisite. And I found myself really enjoying psychology. Okay, so the human behind the hospitality, right? So the people behind it, what makes that tick? What makes that happen? So I thought, well, this will be good for my business classes. Well, as I kept going through, I took another psychology class and found it very interesting again. Went, oh my gosh, there's a lot of challenges that people have to face that I was not aware of. And I found myself really gravitating towards the human condition, what people go through, how they uh, are built, and the trials and tribulations that they go through in their lives with mental illness and mental health challenges. And so at one point, I said, I think I really like psychology. And I changed my career and I changed my major. Um, to psychology. And as I was speaking with my parents, one of which is a clinical social worker and the other is an RN, and my mom kept saying to me, "You can be a nurse. You can be an RN." And I had nurse friends that were going to nursing school, and I thought, there's something about nursing that's not going to get me through the door. And I think we all know what that is, right? I don't mind giving blood. I just don't need to see it all the time in my life. So it was at that point that I said, Dad, I think I'm going to follow in your footsteps, but they were both happy for me and kind of finally settling on a good clinical social work background and education. So I continued in my educational endeavor through social work education and curriculum, and learned that um, in New Haven, there were lots of opportunities to work and at an entry level to help people and be around people with mental health challenges. It started actually as a child inpatient program. That was my first foray into mental health. I mean, I kind of stepped right into it. It was for youth under 12, an inpatient program, and from there, I really grew to like the professional world of people in mental health, from nurses to psychologists to family therapists, and I started learning all the different professions within the mental health services system, and found myself saying, "Oh, I really like social work still," so I'm hanging in there, and I ended up graduating with my degree in social work. Part of the this journey of reflecting on, even today, reflecting on your journey is kind of a journey. Um, I am, as I'm thinking back and retelling these stories, it reminds me of many of the people. The faces come back to me. The experiences of people that probably had autism that I was not aware of. I think about that probably on a daily, weekly basis of some of the people that I worked with when I was quite young, that we weren't really aware of. So um, this this retelling and reflecting um, on a life full of experience is in itself reflective, and continues to be reflective. Um, I graduated with my bachelor's in social work and moved right into my master's. I thought, I really want to do this. This is my clinical social work experience. I want to be a clinical social worker. I'm moving ahead, and I can um, and felt really really comfortable about that. So as I continued to move through, one of um, my first introduction to autism. Um, Besides a couple of little pieces here and there with internships and people who were doing internships in my life, my girlfriend and now wife at the time did an internship and did some work with people with autism, and it was mostly very challenging people, um, people with high level needs and services on the autism spectrum, like ASD level 3, they call it now. Um, and so, not really connected to that, not what I thought I would be seeing or people I would be working with. And then I reflect on frequently in other communications with people who ask about my early, like, why, Mitch, why did you pick, people with ASD and autism in the neurodivergent world? How did that come to you? And the first foray into that was a clinical professor of mine asked our clinical class, was anyone going to be seeing people with autism? And we all kind of looked at each other and said, I don't think we're going to be seeing people with autism, and no disrespect to people with autism and neurodivergence, but at the time, the stereotype was just very severe levels, as it kind of is today. It's getting better, but it's a little bit still today. So that was my first reflection on, wow, I'm not going to be seeing people with autism, and never really had a thought about it. Okay, well, I'm gonna flash forward about 5 years now. I'm working in a clinical program, providing in-home and outpatient therapy services to very challenging mental health conditions for kids and families, and in their school and home settings. And I'm in a clinical consultation group. So picture just a couple of professionals, and we review challenging cases or situations in families that are difficult, where we need to process and make sure we're on the right track and helping them out the best way we can. And one of my colleagues talked about one of their clients having Asperger's syndrome. And again, I had this very same sort of reaction as I did back in my clinical course, back at in my college program. And we all looked around and said, well, what's Asperger's syndrome? And my colleague said, it's a kind of autism. And I said, I'm sorry, what? I had no idea what Asperger's syndrome was. My first time that I heard those words. And it was that moment, and as you can tell by my expression and the way I'm talking about today, it still has a big impact on how, on that moment. That moment has a big impact on me, currently, presently, and then every time I talk about it, it just was like, wow. My thought was, I cannot believe I don't know what Asperger's syndrome is. And if you're seeing people and they're verbal, this is nothing like what I thought autism was. So I was a little bit wow about myself. I can't believe I didn't know. And I was a little horrified. And it was at that moment that I decided I need to find out more about Asperger's syndrome and autism spectrum disorder. And for the point of this presentation, I will probably refer to Asperger's as ASD or neurodivergence, and we'll just let Asperger's syndrome kind of move on. It's not as used term anymore, but it did provide a very important point of contact for me. So it's hard for me to immediately let it go, because it did give me a different perspective of autism that I had. So it really changed my belief system. Not the person, just the name, the label, the way it was identified is just very different. Not necessarily pertaining to who the person was, and named after. So it was at that point that I really needed to learn and understand ASD way more than I did. So I will get to that part of my story in just a second. I want to talk about a parallel thing that was happening to me. And a parallel world that was happening is called my family. So I was raising at the time 3 children. When I say I was raising, I really mean my wife was raising 3 children at the time. Um, an inspiration for me, one of my inspirations for working with people with ASD and parenting specifically, um, comes from my wife, Jeannie Leppicello. So when we talked about having children and raising children, we decided, and more she decided to take parenting seriously. And it wasn't so much an overt, we're going to take it seriously kind of thing. It was Jeannie's style of parenting was, I need to know about this. And well, we know that this doesn't work, and we know that this does. And her approach to parenting inspired me immensely to learn more about child development. And this was, and I went to school and took child development classes, but this was living it, and a whole different ball game, a whole different deal. Parenting young children is living that world. What's it like for them growing up? And so we, and on her, based on her kind of plan and strategy, we we take classes. We took classes called early childhood family education. In the state of Minnesota, we have a very unique opportunity to um, to have for everyone in the state of Minnesota to take a community education class in every public school district, and that is called um, early childhood family education. They have one for special education called early childhood special education. So ECFE, as it's referred to, had all kinds of different classes of all different ages from birth to 5, and now they're even a little bit older than 5. And in those classes, we were able to talk with other parents and relate to their situation, and relate to and have them relate to our situation and get really great support and advice and strategies. And it was all really nicely um, bordered and boundaried by professional parent educators who knew best practices. So we were basically learning best practices parenting strategies for throughout their early childhood development. And it was amazing and fantastic. And I recommend ECFE to everybody and anybody always. It doesn't matter about where your children is at developmentally even. It's a great time and space to be with other parents and to um, understand what they're going through and be understood by them, and a real connecting point for those really, really early challenging parts of your life. So early childhood family education. There may be in other states, but I'm not aware. I'm only aware it's in Minnesota. So that, between Jeannie really practicing ECFE best practices and us really living that, she and ECFE became my inspiration to working with parents. So as a clinician, I'm familiar with family therapy, and I was doing a lot of family therapy at the time and really practicing kind of these two worlds of of parenting and also family dynamics and trying to heal families that were in trouble and needing help. Um, and so working with and really understanding best parenting practices helped me tremendously work with families and work with kids. And I use those models today, and I recommend those models. One of the books that was recommended to us, which we thought was old at the time, is How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. And it was written in the 80s, and it's still a very poignant reference book for me today with families. Um, so anything about kind of helping families and helping parents relate better with their kids were kind of where we were at. And it really supported and strengthened my approach as I continued to work more and more with people with ASD. And as I continued to work more and more with people with autism, I found that, well, the parents of people with autism were also suffering. And so that led me to working with a lot more families with autism. So over the past, 10 to 15 years, I've kind of exclusively uh, stayed with and working with families who are looking for supports, who are needing these supports, who may have not been able to attend an ECFE class on parenting, or found that that was just for a neurotypical child and not for their child with ASD or other neurodivergent needs. So parenting and parenting support programs were what at the time I knew I really wanted to put together. Through ECFE and my clinical practice models, um, I was able to, and I'm really really fortunate to help make and take parenting autism seriously, and make it priority for families. And I don't have to do a whole lot of emphasizing of that, because a lot of families who know me and have worked with me have really hopefully been able to see that all we have to do is pay a little more attention to what we do, how we say the things we say, how we respond and react, um, to make a difference for our kids with autism. It does not take a loud voice. It does not take a tall person. It does not take um, gray hair or no hair in this example, to say we have wisdom and we have experience. It takes connection. It takes a connection. And connection is what has brought families together with an understanding of I don't know what autism is, son or daughter. I don't know your autism, and son and daughter to parent. I don't know how to talk about my autism. And through connection and through parent child connections and relationships, um, I have learned that uh, people can really heal through their autism. They're not healing autism, they're healing relationships, and they're recovering from years and years of misunderstanding, misdiagnosis, miscommunication, and kind of in the end, mistreatment. And the mistreatment isn't on anyone's fault or part. Um, it is just a result of we're not sure how to talk about autism. We're not sure how to talk about the differences in the way people think and feel and relate. And and it used to be kind of a word that we'd only use to describe either a movie called Rain Man or some, a relative that was in a residential center for care. Um, so we're really, really wanting to get, and I want to help parents feel comfortable talking with kids about their autism. One of the things that I ask parents about is, what do you wonder about your child's autism? And the child or teenagers in the room, um, or I'll ask the child, what's really bugging you about your autism? And some kids will come into my office and say, I'm here to talk about my autism. I've been working on things for a few years, but this thing is really getting hard now. And so these are kinds of kids and families that are on top of it and open about it, and they're recovering and moving to feeling better about their world, and consequently, don't need my kind of support anymore, and they're doing their own thing. Um, so that's the and really just feeling better about each other, and that's the hope that I want to provide families. Um, so understanding to action is something that I say a lot, and it really grew, and my program for parents really grew from understanding to action, understanding autism spectrum disorder and neurodivergent differences in thinking and processing and communication makes our actions, our interventions, our supports so much better. We have to understand before we can take an action. Okay. We have to understand how people hear our words. We have to understand how they see our facial expressions and respond to us in order for our actions and supports to be effective. Um, no more, please, no more throwing mud at the wall or anything at the wall and hoping it sticks. We can do better. We can do way better. I think I read a while ago the number of self-help books. So there's a whole genre of self-help books, as we all know, and in that are groups and categories. Parenting is the most sought after and the most published of self-help books. So we have so much information about parenting and now autism related um, differences in the way people think and feel, that we can make some inroads and some differences. During my 30 plus years of working with people with autism, I have found that parents have been the miss component in helping them to understand their child and understand where their child is coming from is is what has led me to something I call the ASD parenting journey. And the ASD parenting journey are really stories about parents who have been on this journey, and everybody is on a different journey. And every child with that parent is on a different journey. And so the continued variety of challenges and successes and tribulations that parents on is never ending. And what is one consistent piece throughout all these years that I've worked with parents is the feeling like I'm alone. I don't understand how this works. I don't understand how to help my child with autism. I don't understand um, why other people can't help me. There's a lot of frustration for parents about other helpers, from teachers to therapists like myself to other medical professionals and providers. And so we really, one of the things that I want to help parents do is advocate and understand. So understanding to action helps them on their parenting journey be um, effective in communicating what their child needs, and that makes a really pleasant situation, let me tell you. So I gotta tell you a quick story about a kid who came in a little while ago, and with his mom, and they hadn't really talked a lot about their autism, and he's a teenager, and we started talking about what it felt like to have autism. And he said, "No one's ever asked me that before. I don't know how to answer that." And I said, "That's okay. That is what we are going to talk about, because that's how you think. That's how you feel. As I don't know how to talk about how I think and how I feel." And we've been working on that and working on that. And the parent came in alone and said to me the other day, um, "It's amazing how spending a little bit of time, we have not been at this very long, but spending a little bit of time just focusing on what's it like to think like you? What's it like to feel like you? What's it like to be you, child?" And those questions to the child have prompted and evoked an array, and it just kind of builds and builds and builds and just gets a lot. Um, it gets a lot better. It's not a lot. It's just a little bit of attention on the right spot, and helping kids feel like they belong and feel like they fit in, and then consequently helping parents um, get reinforcement, that some attention to how their child thinks and feels will help them in the end. That's my mission. That's my goal. And join me, be a part of this, and I look forward to talking with you more. Thank you.